distinguished guests, I would like to thank all of you for coming here at such a short notice and apologize for the delay in starting the function. Until this year, May 1st, for a family, for a Kashmir Times family, was a day of celebration. Maybe a lunch, maybe a party in the office. If it wasn't a lunch party, we all got out of scolding, at least on this day. My father, Ved Bhasin's birthday. Last year, while he was ill, we were planning a surprise birthday party for him with his friends. This year, we are gathered together in his memory. And we felt that it was important to carry on that tradition of celebration. Why so? The man was special, not because he was my father, but there were certain values and certain principles he believed in and lived for and left a mark in the society. Ved Bhasin was a man of great vision, commitment, courage and conviction. He was a multifaceted personality who left a mark in various fields, in art, culture, politics, in social life, human rights, peace activism. But his greatest passion was journalism. He had a certain vision and a dream of a just and an egalitarian society, a secular society, of peace with justice, of a humane society and a democratic world order. And it was through journalism that he sought to pursue this vision and dream. And in Jammu and Kashmir and maybe beyond, he played a pioneering role in many ways, maintaining the best principles and ethics and standards of journalism, using journalism not only to suit his professional appetite to inform and write, but use this skill purposefully to side with the underdog, with the marginalized, with the voiceless and the weak and the oppressed, at the cost of angering the high and mighty, and often had to pay a price. He would proudly say, I was born on the Labor Day. And that is why I believe in the rights of the labor and the laboring and the working class. He also strived for an independent and a vibrant media and made a contribution. At the same time, he felt very strongly about the responsibility the media has on its shoulders. He was very cautious of not becoming a vehicle of communal provocation and felt that that is a role that media must play. And one should criticize freely, but never personalize criticism. Quite often he was known as an anti-establishment man. Some people admired him for that, some criticized him for that, and used the word with a certain amount of contempt. Perhaps that word needs to be redefined and contextualized. Did he write against the government just for the heck of it? Because he drove certain pleasure out of it? Got some monetary benefits or some political benefits? He did it consciously and with a sense of responsibility. Because the essence of journalism he believed in lies in understanding the responsibility of holding the powerful accountable. And he spoke out for the oppressed, downtrodden, and the voiceless, giving voice to them. So anti-establishment thus would mean speaking the truth, howsoever bitter it may be. And he had the courage and the conviction to go against the strongest of the winds and fight the strongest of the enemy without fearing the consequences. It wasn't easy to do so, especially in view of the nature of the politics in Jammu and Kashmir. It's very complex conflict and the various power centers operating here. He had to negotiate through all these, and he maintained his own and survived. His head held high with great dignity and no regrets. And he stood his ground even when he had to suffer. He was physically attacked. His office was attacked several times. There was slanderous campaigns also against him at one point of time. In the last few years, Kashmir Times, the institution he built from scratch, went through a lot of financial losses. But he refused to give up his principled stand and maintained the traditions and ethics of journalism and an independent and free media. Even in his illness, while we were still going through the financial crisis, he kept cautioning us to be prepared for anything. But never once did he preach compromise on the independent policy of the newspaper. That was his immense courage and strength. It is in view of what he stood for and what he believed in, and for the fact that he was a people's man, we felt that this special day could not have gone without a celebration. And so we decided to carry on with this tradition and begin on his birth anniversary a series of memorial lectures. Words sometimes have a very different kind of play in your life. A very dear friend of mine who lost her husband once told me, you accept reality at the end of the day, but there are little words that come back to haunt you. It was while she was filling forms and writing her status as a widow, or prefixing her husband's name with late, is when words begin to torment. And I can understand that better today. Because when I say memorial and memory, these are very tormenting words. My own personal loss or grief is too small in front of the legacy that my father leaves behind. And as part of Kashmir Times, I and my whole Kashmir Times family, we feel that we owed it to him to organize a public lecture. We will, in due course of time, be institutionalizing this effort of holding regular such lectures on an annual, if not a biannual basis, and bringing out publications based on what he wrote and what he said. There are some recordings and there are scattered writings, which we need to compile. In his own lifetime, I have one regret, that he never wrote a book, which he should have. Now we'll try and compile his writings and come up in a book form. We also hope to sometime institutionalize a media fellowship in his name if we can. But there is a far bigger legacy of Mr. Ved Bhasin to be fulfilled. That is, of believing in his dream and his vision. May 1st was also significant for my father for another reason, though a sad reason. His very dear friend, Shamim Ahmed Shamim, a very well-known journalist and a writer, a parliamentarian, died on this day at a very young age of 45. They were very different personalities, but held very similar views, ideologies and perceptions, dreams and visions. And this was a dream of a just, peaceful society, a secular and a democratic world order. And I think May 1st is a perfect time when we redeem our faith in that vision. I'm happy to say that my father was a great optimist. And he was an optimist till his end. While he was ill, I felt that he was very dismayed and disillusioned by the way politics was shaping around in the world, by the increasing conflicts and wars, by the increasing might of the right wing and the communal forces within India. But I was wrong. While he was able to write during his illness, I gave him a diary to jot down whatever he felt. And I quote a passage from that, written on September 1st, 2015. I wonder why the ruling elite the world over fear freedom, freedom of thought, expression, freedom to oppose, criticize, disagree and protest. Why they are intolerant and insensitive to criticism. Why injustice, inequality, exploitation, repression and terrorism persists. When will we see the dawn of real freedom? A world free of hunger, disease, man-made calamities, killings and rule of the gun. Will our dream of a world freed from conflicts, wars, bloodshed, hunger, disease and poverty, and that of a new social order based on justice and equality ever be fulfilled? I am disappointed, but hopeful of a better world, free from all ills, where all the people will feel happy, contented, and lead a purposeful life, free from greed and exploitation. And I think everybody who believes in that vision is an heir to that legacy. And with these words, I'd like to invite Mr. Said Malik to say a few words. Said Malik is a senior journalist from Jammu and Kashmir. He was very close to my father as a friend, as a mentor, as a companion.
Our chief guest this morning, my colleague, Mr. Siddharth Ragraj, Anuradha, Sethi Saab, Prabodhji, and ladies and gentlemen. Before I start on the main topic, I'm going to make a brief intervention. I would like to point out one fact, that this 1st of May has created a fateful linkage. Today is Shamim's death anniversary and Vedji's birth anniversary. For the last 24 years, since Shamim died in 1980, Vedji never missed to be with us on this day, till he fell ill last year. He came to celebrate his own birthday with us, more of it to commemorate Shamim. So today, here, when she called me, we also had a function there. I said, it's a debt of gratitude I must pay, I owe it to him. And the debt of gratitude with Vedji has, we have to pay him back, is much more than I just mentioned. It's also not a mere coincidence that Shamim and Ved Bhasin were quite dissimilar in many respects, but they were very similar in their mindset, in their thinking, in their approach. They were both freedom lovers, they were both secular, they were both against exploitation, they were both against narrow-mindedness. And the common thing that bound them together is that even when they opposed tooth and nail, when they criticized people, they stopped short of hating hatred. whether it is between regions, whether it is between sects, whether it is communities or countries. This is the problem today, which I am sure Siddharth Varadarajan will deal with it. The hatred, when we start, there is one thing being critical, there is one thing being rival, one thing being opponent, but everything has a limit. That is what the journalist must observe. I am sure none of us would find, I'm not saying they are superhuman beings, the Shamim or Bhasin Sahib. They must have made their own mistakes, their own share of mistakes. They must have had their own shortcomings. But when it comes to dealing with public affairs, expressing their opinion, they stopped. They were against hatred of any kind. So hate not this, hate not, even in the worst of times, whether it was an agitation in Kashmir or agitation in Jammu against that or vice versa, at that time, it was a saner voice that we heard from both of them. Shamim in earlier times, Vedji more forcefully, Shamim in Urdu in his own way, he did the same thing there, and he did not win friends, I must tell you, because this type of approach does not win friends. It only creates, there are many people whose vested interests are hurt, and this was the person Vedji symbolized. Vedji's another quality was that he was consistent. You see, I must say, I have also been with him for so many years now. His consistency, and whenever he was convinced that he is right, he was ready to pay the price for saying it loudly. Not many of us, at least in my profession I can say, would claim that type of record. Another point I think, that Vedji never used his instrument of approach or talking to people, that is his newspaper or his profession, for his personal aggrandizement. Never. Look at his material assets, where he stands, in compared to his contemporaries. Look at where he stands as far as possessions are concerned. Where nobody can match him, or very few can indeed, if at all, is that being consistent in whatever he believed was true. And many would, I am sure, I agree to this, that not everybody need to agree with his viewpoint, but many would agree that he was honest in his opinion, whatever he said. There is always room for difference. There was always room for, in fact, when he differed, he gave the right to others, and he fought for that right. That is the essence of whether it is democracy or journalism or whatever it is. I am sure I should not be touching more on that, because that is what my friend Siddharth Varadarajan has come here for, even talking. I'll only say, wind up by saying one thing, that it's a legacy that has been left behind. And I may again mention Shamim's name, Shamim and Vedji, which deserves to be carried forward. And it's a good thing that they have started this series. It's good that you, local society, at least you carry forward the ideas that are generated in these gatherings, and from that, maybe the future generation. I have seen from our experience, we are reproducing year after year what Shamim wrote on issues that confront us even today, whether it is issues economic issues, social issues, ideological issues, political issues, what he wrote. And I find, though he died in 1980, most of it is 99.9% relevant today also. And it is needed today also. I wish same thing is done in case of Vedji's writings, his speeches, and this I think is a good step in that direction, and I wish it all the success. Thank you.
Mr. Krishndev Sethi has been a friend of my father for the last 5-6 decades. He had a major role to play in the Quit Kashmir movement. And despite the very different political ideologies, my father was a socialist, Mr. Sethi is a leftist. But on a personal level, there was a very strong bonding. And there were certain common grounds that they agreed on secularism, on a democratic world. And I'd now like to request Mr. Sethi to say a few words.
مہمان خصوصی صاحب اور دیگر سامعین حضرات، مرنے والے مرتے ہیں لیکن فنا ہوتے نہیں، مرنے والے مرتے ہیں لیکن فنا ہوتے نہیں، دل سے کبھی وہ جدا ہوتے نہیں۔ آج وید بھسین صاحب کی 70ویں سالگرہ ان کی عدم موجودگی میں، دائمی عدم موجودگی میں، جسمانی طور پر عدم موجودگی میں منائی جا رہی ہے، اور مجھے بھی اس میں موقع دیا گیا۔ میری نگاہ میں وید بھسین کی وفات نہیں ہوئی، حقیقی معنوں میں جسمانی طور پر اگرچہ وہ ہم سے جدا ہیں، لیکن ان کی صحافت، ان کی خطابت، ان کی ذہانت، ان کی شرافت، ان کی انسانیت، ان کی بے خوفی آج بھی ہمارے ذہن میں زندہ ہے۔ اور میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ بہت عرصے تک جب کوئی بھی ریجیڈنسی دور سے گزرے گا اور کشمیر ٹائم کی طرف نگاہ کرے گا، اسے وید بھسین کی یاد آئے گی اور وہ اپنے وید بھسین کے ساتھ میں معزز مہمان اور مہمان خصوصی اور آپ کے درمیان زیادہ عرصے تک نہیں رہنا چاہتا، کیونکہ میں ان کے بھی خیالات سننے ہیں، آپ کے بھی، لیکن جس موضوع پر انہوں نے تقریر کرنی ہے میڈیا کے سلسلے میں، اس سلسلے میں کہنا چاہتا ہوں کہ جموں کشمیر میں عرصہ سے میڈیا تھا، ریٹن میڈیا بھی اور دوسرا بھی، لیکن اس پر غلبہ تھا، اس میڈیا پر غلبہ تھا، سرکار کا بھی غلبہ تھا، پولیٹیکل پارٹی کا بھی غلبہ تھا۔ اس کو آزاد میڈیا میں تبدیل کیا وید بھسین نے، جس میں کوئی شک کی بات نہیں ہے، اسے کوئی انکار نہیں کر سکتا۔ جتنے پہلے صحافی ہوئے ہیں ان کی بڑی خدمات ہیں، میں نام لینا نہیں چاہتا طوالت کی وجہ سے، ان کی خدمات کا میں معترف ہوں، لیکن اس کو آزاد جب بھی واقعات کے پیش کرنے میں، حالات کے بیان کرنے میں، نقطۂ نظر کے بیان کرنے میں وقت آیا، وید بھسین کی قلبی تلوار بلا خوف نہ لڑتا کے ساتھ سامنے آئی، اور اس نے اپنے قلم کو ایک آزاد میڈیا کی طرف کے وہ بنیاد ڈالی جموں اور کشمیر میں۔ مجھے یاد ہے کہ جب کشمیر میں ملیٹنسی شروع ہوئی تو ملیٹنسی کی خبر دینے تک کو کچھ لوگ دیش دروہی سمجھتے تھے، وطن کی دشمنی کے ہو کیا رہا ہے، لیکن ان واقعات سے وید بھسین نے قوم کو آگاہ کیا۔ یہ بہت بڑا کریڈٹ ہے جو وزیر کے اس کی دیش بھکتی کا کریڈٹ ہے، اور آپ سب مان گئے کہ اس ملیٹنسی نے مذہب میں کیا گل کھلائے اور کیا ہوا۔ اگر ریپریشن ہوا، چاہے کشمیر میں ہوا، چاہے یہاں ہوا، ریاستی علاقیں ہوئی، مطلب گولیاں چلی، نظر بندیاں ہوئیں، افسوا جیسے قوانین بنے، اور نظر بندی قانون بنے، ان سب کے خلاف وید بھسین کی قلمی تلوار جو اٹھی اس کے لیے ہمیشہ یاد کیا جائے گا. میں اپنے معزز مہمان کو بھی یہ بتانا چاہتا ہوں کہ جموں کشمیر میں آزاد میڈیا کا ترجمان، نگہبان اور شروع کرنے والا وید بھسین تھا. اس کو نہیں بتایا. میں نے کہا کہ میں ان کے اور آپ کے درمیان زیادہ عرصہ کھڑا نہیں رہنا چاہتا، لیکن سیکولرزم کی حفاظت، سوشلزم کی حفاظت، سول لبرٹیز کی حفاظت، انسانی حقوق کی حفاظت، ہندوستان اور پاکستان کے درمیان تعلقات بہتر بنانے کی جدوجہد، ان سب معاملات میں وید بھسین کی کنٹریبیوشن کو کوئی نظر انداز نہیں کرتا. اور ان کی حق بیانی کو میں اور وید بھسین آزاد کشمیر میں بھی اکٹھے گئے اور وہاں پر بھی ان کی یاد ابھی تک ہے. وید بھسین کی ڈیتھ پر بھی میر پر خصوصی طور پر جس طرح سے ماتم منایا گیا یا سے زیادہ غمناکی کے ساتھ منایا گیا، یہ ان کی بڑی ذہانت کا نتیجہ. میں صرف علامہ اقبال کے چند اشعار کے ساتھ وید بھسین کی خاصیت کو بیان کرنا چاہتا ہوں. علامہ اقبال نے لکھا ہے، کہتا ہوں وہی بات، سمجھتا ہوں جسے حق، نہ ابراہ مسجد ہوں میں نہ تعذیب کا فرزند، اپنے بھی خفا مجھ سے بیگانے بھی ناخوش، میں زہر حلال کو کبھی کہہ نہ سکا کن. مشکل ہے کہ ایک بندہ حق بین اور حق انجیش خواہشات کے تودے کو کہے کوہ دماغن. اس سے بڑا میں کوئی اور عدیہ تبریک اور عدیہ تحسین وید بھسین کو پیش نہیں. اپنا ساتھ بڑا لمبا 1947 سے لے کر آج تک ہمارے خیالات میں بھی تضاد تھا. وہ سوشلسٹ ڈیموکریٹک سوشلسٹ تھے، میں پیشہ ور ریولوشنری تھا، لیکن ہماری دوستی قائم رہی. اب سب ساتھی آہستہ آہستہ چلے جا رہے ہیں. اب میرے جیسے دو چار اب جموں میں اپنا شناسا بھی بہت کم رہ گئے، لیکن میں سمجھتا ہوں منزل تنہا پر اکیلے پہنچے، کوئی تمنا ساتھ نہ تھی، تھک تھک کے سلانا آخر ایک ایک ساتھی بچھڑ گئے.
Now the moment we've all been waiting for. I'd first of all like to thank Mr. Siddharth Varadarajan for accepting the invitation at a very short notice. It was only last week that we started organizing this and he immediately accepted. Mr. Varadarajan needs no introduction, but still, as is customary, he is the founding editor of The Wire, an independent news and analysis website. And those of you who haven't seen it must check it. It has some of the most brilliant articles. He was earlier the editor of The Hindu. He's an economist by training. He studied at the London School of Economics and Columbia University and taught at New York University before returning to India to join the Times of India as an editorial writer in 1995. After working at the Times of India in various capacities, he moved to The Hindu in 2004, eventually becoming the 100-year-old newspaper's first editor to be appointed from outside the owning family. He's been a Poynter Fellow at Yale University and a visiting lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley Journalism School, besides working as a senior fellow at Shiv Nadar University in Delhi before he launched The Wire with a group of like-minded journalists. Siddharth is the recipient of the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Print Journalism. His book on the Gujarat riots, Gujarat, The Making of a Tragedy, was published by Penguin in 2002.
अनुराधा जी, Said Malik Saab, Prabhu Jamal ji, Comrade Sethi, friends, it's honestly a great honor for me to be invited to deliver this first memorial lecture in honor of Ved Bhasin ji, an editor and journalist that I admire greatly. मेरी उनसे पहली मुलाकात शायद 90 के दशक में न्यूयॉर्क में हुआ था, जब मैं उन दिनों कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ता था। और वही दिन थे जब जम्मू कश्मीर में मिलिटेंसी और ह्यूमन राइट्स वायलेशंस एक पीक पे थे। और जाहिर है कि अमेरिका में जो हिंदुस्तान से विद्यार्थी वहाँ पे पढ़ रहे थे और जो हिंदुस्तानियों की जो कम्युनिटी थी वहाँ पे चिंतित थे कि भाई JNK में हो क्या रहा है। और जाहिर है कि अगर आप हिंदुस्तानियों से बात करें और हिंदुस्तान के अलग अलग सूबों के लोगों से बात करें और कश्मीर के अंदर जो लोग हैं उनसे बात करें, विचारों की कमी नहीं थी। अलग अलग ख्याल थे लोगों के और उन विचारों और ख्यालों को लेके आमतौर पे लड़ाई झगड़े भी होते थे, बहस होती थी। भसीन साहब से हम लोगों ने ये सीखा कि आप के अपने सियासी सोच, आपके अपनी विचारधारात्मक जो एक आइडिया है, आपकी जो अपनी सोच है, वो अपनी जगह में ठीक है और इस पे बहस होनी चाहिए। लेकिन अगर हम कश्मीर के मसले के बारे में बात करें तो कुछ चीज़ों को मरकज़ बना के हमको आगे बढ़ना चाहिए। और ख़ास तवज्जो उन्होंने इंसानी हुकूक पे दिया कि कश्मीर हिंदुस्तान का अटूट अंग है, नहीं है। कोई कहता आज़ाद होना चाहिए, कोई कुछ करे। मिलजुल के हम बात कर लें, इस पर बहस कर लें। 370 होना चाहिए, नहीं होना चाहिए। लेकिन हिंदुस्तान के आईन के मुताबिक जो इंसानी हुकूक हर शहरी को मिलने चाहिए, उन राइट्स को अगर हम सेंटर स्टेज पे डाल के पॉलिसीज के बारे में बात करें तो ज़्यादा बेहतर होगा। और इस चीज़ इंसानी हुकूक को अगर हम एक तरह से एक पॉइंट ऑफ कन्वर्जेंस बनाएं, जिसमें बहस नहीं होनी चाहिए, जिसमें डिवीजन या डिफरेंस ऑफ ओपिनियन नहीं होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के तहत जो राइट्स गारंटीड हैं सिटीजन्स के लिए, ये मांग करना कि उन हुकूक, वो ह्यूमन राइट्स जो हैं, जो मानव अधिकार हैं, पूरी तरह से उनको रिस्पेक्ट मिलना चाहिए, ये कभी भी किसी डेमोक्रेसी के अंदर एक पॉलिटिकल पॉइंट ऑफ डिवीजन नहीं होना चाहिए। उनका ये मौक़िफ़ उन दिनों मुझे लगता है कि एक तरह से काफ़ी बहादुरी का उनका स्टैंड था। आमतौर पे उन दिनों, आज भी शायद जो लोग इंसानी हुकूक की बात करते हैं, बड़ी आसानी से उन पे तरह तरह के इल्ज़ाम लगाए जाते हैं। लेकिन भसीन साहब अपने मौक़िफ़ से पीछे नहीं हटे और अलग अलग लोगों से वो बात बहस करते थे, कन्विंस करने की कोशिश करते थे, लेकिन अपने प्रिंसिपल स्टैंड से और ख़ास तौर पे अपने जर्नलिज्म से पीछे नहीं हटे। तो ऐसे सहाफ़ी के नाम पे अगर मेमोरियल लेक्चर स्थापित किया जाए और अनुराधा जी 1 या 2 दिन का भी नोटिस देते हैं, तो हाँ, रजामंदी देने के लिए और एक्सेप्ट करने के लिए मुझे लगता है कि मैं कम से कम देरी नहीं कर पाता। टॉपिक जो अनुराधा जी और हमने मिलके तय किया वो ये, क्योंकि भसीन साहब थे सहाफ़ी और मैं भी जर्नलिस्ट हूँ, और जर्नलिज्म एक ऐसा टॉपिक है जो एक तरह से देश के सामने जो सबसे बड़े, सारे बड़े सवाल हैं, जर्नलिज्म पूरी तरह से उन सवालों से जूझता रहता है। और मुझे लगता है कि कोई ऐसी समस्या नहीं है, कोई ऐसा मसला नहीं है देश के अंदर जिसका कनेक्शन, अच्छा या बुरा, जर्नलिज्म सहाफियत से ना हो। तो मेरा मानना है कि challenges and opportunities of the media is a very fitting topic for the subject of this first memorial lecture for Ved Bhasin ji. And what I will try to do is to talk about the importance of journalism, identify what are the stress points, what are the various crises that are emerging within Indian journalism, and try to connect it to some of the political and institutional challenges that India as a society, India as a country, India as a nation state is confronting today. At a time when there is no opposition to speak of, within parliament or outside, when a reconfiguration of power is being effected between the executive and the judiciary, and when all kinds of regressive social and political forces are making their presence felt, India needs fearless, objective, professional journalism. There are many individual journalists whose work tells us a great deal about what is happening behind the veil, behind the facade of incredible India, behind the parda of India shining and Achhe Din. But the Indian media ecosystem and Indian journalism as a whole is today mired in deep crisis. At a time when the people of India most need its assertiveness and independence, the media has lost its moorings. It has lost its anchor in the public interest it is meant to serve and is drifting aimlessly, buffeted by the fickle headwinds of a business and governance model that prefers risk aversion, trivia, entertainment, gladiatorial contests, and opinion mongering in the guise of news to actual in-depth objective reporting, analysis and commentary. The fact that this business and governance model is itself coming under strain and showing signs of breaking down is only adding to the pressure on good journalism. This is of course not a problem that is confined to India alone. Dean Starkman, a couple of years ago, published a critique of American journalism's failure to predict the 2008 financial crisis and called his book The Watchdog That Didn't Bark. Let's see what he says. To read various, and I quote now from him, to read various journalistic accounts of mortgage lending and Wall Street during the bubble is to come away with radically differing representations of the soundness of the US financial system. It all depended on what you were reading. Anyone paying attention to the conventional business press could be forgiven for thinking that things were, in the end, basically normal. Yes, there was a housing bubble. Any fair reading of the press of the time makes this clear, even if warnings were mitigated by just as loud celebrations of the boom. And yes, the press did say that there were a lot of terrible mortgage products out there. Those are important consumer and investor issues, but that's all they are. When the gaze turned to financial institutions and their basic ill health, the message was entirely clear, was entirely different, all clear. It's not just the puff pieces or the language that sometimes lapses into toadying. It's even the stories that were ostensibly critical of individual Wall Street firms, which describe them in terms of their competition with one another. Would their earnings be okay, was the question that these journalists like to ask. And Starkman concludes, there was a bubble all right. The problem is that the business press was inside that bubble. Stark notes that the odd critical story of what was happening on Wall Street did run in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, but these never became central to the business press's perception of what was actually going on and were never followed up. Turning to India, in the face of persistent warning signs of what lies ahead on the social, cultural, political, environmental and economic front, as the NDA government at the center gets down to business, now about to enter its third year, the Indian watchdog, our press and television, is not just failing to bark, it is busy wagging its tail. A bubble may not be the best way to describe the hothouse of adulation that has been built up around the cult of the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, but the national media is very much in it. The kind of questions that need to be asked of our political leadership and political parties are not being asked. And it is in this void that all kinds of new and dangerous developments are taking place. The re-emergence, for example, of Article 356 as an instrument for destabilizing the constitutional equilibrium between the center and the states, a problem we had all assumed had gone away because of the Bombay judgment. The tussle between the executive and the judiciary, manifested most recently in the tears that were shed by the Chief Justice. The systematic attack on the autonomy of educational and cultural institutions. The strengthening of the cage which holds supposedly free parrots like the Central Bureau of Investigation and the National Investigation Agency, and so on. It is this challenge posed by the media's silence on these issues, or the media's unwillingness to really go after these stories, that I hope to describe and analyze in my lecture today. Before I describe the present, it is worth remembering that the sins of the media that we see in front of us have a hoary past. In a remarkable lecture delivered in 1943 on the occasion of the 101st birth anniversary of the social reformer M.G. Ranade, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had this to say about the press in India. And you'll have to pinch yourself when I read this extract and remind yourself that he's talking about 1943. Journalism in India, this is Ambedkar's words, journalism in India was once a profession. It has now become a trade. It is no more moral, it has no more moral function than the manufacture of soap. It does not regard itself as the responsible advisor of the public. To give the news uncolored by any motive, to present a certain view of public policy which it believes to be for the good of the community, to correct and chastise without fear all those, no matter how high, who have chosen a wrong or a barren path, is not regarded by journalism in India as its first or foremost duty. Instead, to accept a hero and worship him has become its principal duty. Under it, news gives place to sensation, reasoned opinion to unreasoning passion. Appeal to the minds of responsible people gives way to appeal to the emotions of the irresponsible. What Lord Salisbury spoke of the Northcliffe journalism as written by office boys for office boys. Indian journalism is all that plus something more. It is written by drum boys to glorify their heroes. Never has the interest of country been sacrificed so senselessly for the propagation of hero worship. Never has hero worship become so blind as we see it in India today. There are, I am glad to say, honorable exceptions, but they are too few and their voice is never heard. 1943. Ambedkar was speaking, of course, about Gandhi and Jinnah. Those were the heroes he referred to. But his words have a familiar echo, don't they? He then went on to make another prescient point. In establishing their supremacy, these leaders have taken the aid of big business and money magnates. For the first time in our country, money is taking the field as an organized power. For in these days, with the press in hand, it is easy to manufacture great men. In the past 3 decades, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen the media lionize one leader after the other. 1984, you remember the huge emotional support that we saw in the media for Rajiv Gandhi. Then we had Narasimha Rao. Then we had Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Then Manmohan Singh. P. Chidambaram. Almost always, because they represented at various points in time the hopes and aspirations of the rich and privileged. Now let us consider the most recent case of what Baba Saheb Ambedkar would consider manufactured greatness. Narendra Modi is where he is today, not just because he was a more capable contender for the post of Prime Minister than the inexperienced Rahul Gandhi, or only because voters were fed up, as they should have been, with the corruption and inefficiencies of the United Progressive Alliance government, but because his capabilities were the subject of a relentless and well-funded marketing campaign that got off the ground as early as 2010. This campaign was fueled by the impatience of the corporate sector for a return to the Achhe Din of rent seeking, the process of earning super profits from favorable allocations of spectrum, coal, land, etc., which the weak and indecisive government of Manmohan Singh was incapable of defending in the face of an independent judiciary and an assertive Comptroller and Auditor General. It is an open secret that the corporate sector deserted the ruling Congress and started pouring money into the Modi campaign. Indications are that the amount spent in the 2014 Lok Sabha election runs to a figure at least 10 times higher than in the election which preceded it 5 years earlier. One estimate pegs the BJP's advertising spend across all India, including hoardings, at a staggering rupees 5,000 crore. That is just a little bit less than the roughly $1 billion that the Obama campaign spent under all heads in the 2012 US presidential election. Now, what about expenditure limits, you might ask? Well, you might ask the question, but the media didn't. Another case of the watchdog that didn't bark. For the 2014 election was a reminder of the one big loophole in India's election rules designed to favor parties backed by the rich. While there is a limit on what individual candidates may spend, and currently that limit is either rupees 54 lakh or rupees 70 lakh, depending on which state or constituency a candidate happens to contest from, there is actually no limit to what political parties may spend in the course of an election campaign. The only limits are on the candidate's expenditure. In Britain, whose election system India broadly follows, there is a cap on both the individual candidate's expenditure and his or her party's. It would be naive on our part to believe the deployment of money on the scale it has been would not have had an impact on the election result and on the policies of the government, which is elected on the basis of financial support from the richest Indians of this magnitude. In the Amarnath Chawla case, the Supreme Court in 1974 recognized the principle that election expenditure must be limited in order to ensure equality between candidates and to eliminate as far as possible the influence of big money in the electoral process. Though it did not set a limit, it ruled that some limitative ruling on expenditure for general party propaganda during elections is eminently desirable. And it's been more than 4 decades since that ruling of the Supreme Court. There is no sign of any attempt by any political party to introduce expenditure limits for political parties. The court had observed then that if election expenditure were not limited, political parties would go all out for collecting contributions, and obviously the largest contributions would be from the rich and affluent, who constitute but a fraction of the electorate. And this is the Supreme Court's own words. The pernicious influence of big money would then play a decisive role in controlling the democratic process of the country, quote, unquote. This is precisely what is happening with the corporate sector now fully into the act, making both open and hidden contributions. In a story that was barely reported and certainly not followed up, the Delhi High Court in April 2014, in the midst of the election campaign, found that both the Congress and the BJP had been guilty of illegally accepting money from the UK-based firm Vedanta. The response of the BJP, of the Modi government, to this judgment was not to apologize and ensure that the BJP and all parties will henceforth obey the law, but to smuggle in to the recent finance bill a change in the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, which will redefine